Let's talk about the Castle Doctrine. We have a question here. If you have children in your house, do you have a duty to retreat? Even if you're in a restrictive state, no reasonable person would abandon their kids. All right, so that's another issue, actually. I hadn't caught the first time I read it, so it's a good thing I read it again. First of all, there's only 11 states that impose a generalized legal duty to retreat in self-defense. I just pulled it up, and now I'm going to have to pull it up again to read it back to all of you. Those states, the minority of states that impose a legal duty to retreat before you can defend yourself, at least with deadly force, are Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. The other 39 states are all stand your ground states. You do not have a legal duty to retreat before you can defend yourself in otherwise lawful self-defense, even if safe retreat would have been possible. Now, in the 11 duty to retreat states, you're only required to retreat if you can do so with complete safety. Of course, that's a judgment call that will be made by other people. But even in those 11 states that do impose a generalized legal duty to retreat before you can defend yourself, they all have at least one exception to that generalized rule of retreat, and that is the Castle Doctrine. Now, the Castle Doctrine is commonly understood to be broader than it actually is. Properly understood, the Castle Doctrine means one thing and one thing only. If you would have been obligated to retreat before you can defend yourself out on a public street, you're relieved of that legal duty to retreat if you're defending yourself in your home. And every state, all 50 states, has some flavor of the Castle Doctrine that relieves you of an otherwise existing legal duty to retreat when you're defending yourself in your castle, in your home. But there are at least 3 flavors of Castle Doctrine. There's the scope of the castle, what qualifies as a castle. That varies from state to state. There's who can claim Castle Doctrine privileges. And then there's against whom you can claim Castle Doctrine privileges. So let me address those 3 variables. The scope of your castle. Inside the 4 walls of your home, your primary residence or a temporary residence, if you're staying in a hotel room, the hotel room is your castle. If you're staying in your RV on vacation, the RV is your castle. Not when it's in storage, but when you're living in it. If you're camping in a tent, the tent becomes your castle while you're camping in it. Inside the 4 walls of your castle is always counted for Castle Doctrine purposes. Almost all states will also count something called curtilage. Curtilage is the area on the outside of your home, in close proximity to your home, that's part of the normal day-to-day use of your home. And that's counted as your castle for Castle Doctrine purposes too. So you would also be relieved of a legal duty to retreat within your curtilage. Now, we don't really know where curtilage ends. It's generally judged on a case-by-case basis, which is pretty hazardous. We do know for sure once you've reached a place where you no longer have a right of exclusion, so you walk out your front door and you finally reach a public street, you're standing in the public street, you don't have a right to exclude people from a public street, you've definitely outside your curtilage at that point. Somewhere in between is where your curtilage ends. You never really know. Also, a place of business might be counted as castle if it's your place of business. It depends on the state. Now, that also touches upon to whom can claim Castle Doctrine privilege. If you're in your own castle, you can claim Castle Doctrine privilege. I don't have a duty to retreat from an attack in my castle. But what if you're in someone else's castle? Well, some states say that you also benefit, that their Castle Doctrine privilege extends to guests, but other states say no. So if you're in your castle, you have Castle Doctrine privileges, but if you're in someone else's castle, you don't. You do have a duty to retreat there. It's not your castle. And against whom can you claim Castle Doctrine privileges? If you're attacked by a genuine intruder in your castle, you always have Castle Doctrine privileges. But what if the person you're attacked by, it's also their castle? What if it's a spouse? What if it's a co-dweller? Some states say you only have Castle Doctrine privileges against an actual intruder. If the person you're defending yourself against, it's also their castle, then you do have a duty to retreat. If both parties are in their castle, they both lose Castle Doctrine. We expect them to safely retreat before they use deadly force in self-defense. And that's the law there. So just an example, a quick, what I'd What did that take? 5-minute coverage of the Castle Doctrine. Now, you mentioned, so you'll notice in your Castle, all those variables, none of them included children, right? The only way the presence of children becomes involved is, I mentioned if you're in one of the duty to retreat states and you're out on a public street and you can retreat with complete safety, you're required to do that before you can use deadly force in self-defense. Simple enough, right? But what about if it's a defense of others situation? You're not just defending yourself. There are others present. There's an elderly parent. There are small children. Let's imagine that there are people you feel you have a duty to protect. They're your parents. They're your children. Would a duty to retreat state say you have a legal duty to flee the threat and leave them behind? The answer is no. The answer is no. You have to be able to retreat with complete safety, and they, the elderly parents, the small children, would also have to be able to retreat with complete safety. You're not required to leave them behind. So that applies, that rationale applies not just in your home, in your castle, but even on a public street. You're attacked on a public street by a one-legged homeless guy with a machete. You could run away. But maybe your elderly father can't. Maybe he's got a walker. You're not required to leave him behind. You would not have a legal duty to retreat in that circumstance. Helpful? I hope it was.
Thanks for watching this highlight segment of our full-length Law of Self-Defense live stream. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to give us a like and subscribe for more expert analysis on politics, law, and how to be hard to convict. And to watch the full-length episode of this show, just click right here. Stay safe.